One of the great things about being a college journalism major today is that it's incredibly easy for professors to build their own news sites and allow students to experience every aspect of the publishing process. Not that long ago, journalism students had few avenues for publication outside their college newspaper. Lydia Chavez took advantage of this dynamic while teaching at UC Berkeley. In 2008, she and her colleagues launched Mission Local, a local news blog that covered San Francisco's Mission District. It quickly gained traction within the community, and in 2014, Lydia spun it out into its own independent news organization. Today, it's fully sustained by a mix of large and small donors. In our interview, Lydia walked me through how she incorporated the site into her journalism curriculum, why she spun it out from the university, and whether she thinks Mission Local's model can be replicated across the US. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, have you ever wondered how I monetize this show? It's entirely reliant on subscriptions to my Substack newsletter. When you subscribe, you're able to book a half-hour introductory phone call with me. You also receive subscriber-only interviews with some of the world's most successful media entrepreneurs. Support the work I do here by subscribing at simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. And finally, if you're on the lookout for interviews with the world's most successful media entrepreneurs about how they built their businesses, then this is the show for you. So take a few moments to hit the subscribe button down below. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey, Lydia, thanks for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
So you helped launch a local news site in San Francisco called Mission Local. For people who don't know San Francisco, that area, what is the Mission District?
The Mission District is the oldest neighborhood in San Francisco. It's actually where Mission Dolores was first established by the Spanish, and it is an incredibly vibrant. I chose this district because it's identifiable. In the beginning, we were really very much focused on the mission, but I also felt that from the Mission District, you could report on any problem in San Francisco. It's very rich culturally. It has every urban ill. So yeah, it's kind of the perfect place to report on all of San Francisco. But we've expanded our coverage since then.
And you have a deep background as a reporter going all the way back to like the 80s, right?
Yes. I reported for Time Magazine. I started with the Albuquerque Tribune, which is very local. It no longer exists. Time Magazine, the Los Angeles Times. My last job was with the New York Times. And I worked on the business desk and also the Metro desk and also the foreign desk. I covered the war in El Salvador and sort of the rise of democracy in Argentina after Alfonsin's election.
Did you ever cover like local news, like when you were in the Albuquerque?
Oh yeah, I mean Albuquerque is all local. That's completely it. And actually, I got my start when I worked at when I was a student at Columbia J School. I had never really had much journalism experience, so I worked for free for the West Sider, which was a throwaway newspaper, and I covered an issue there that ended up being my master's thesis that later got published in New York Magazine. So I did a lot of local reporting.
And what drew you to academia?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I had a couple of children, and I really wanted to spend more time with them, and it seemed like a good sort of mix. But it was tough to give up reporting. I loved it. I loved being a reporter, and I loved working at the Times. It was a great job.
And you teach at Berkeley?
And I taught at Berkeley. I taught in Berkeley up until 2019. 29 years. And Mission Local actually started as a project at Berkeley.
And did you teach like all kinds of journalism courses, or was there like a specialty?
I taught the basic report. It was for entering level graduate students. I taught the basic reporting and writing class in which you're preparing students for summer internships, and then they would come back the next year and work on what they needed to work on. And I also taught a lot of foreign reporting classes and sort of started at Berkeley, the foreign reporting specialty, where we would, bring journalists from abroad. At first, I taught the Latin American courses, but then if you haven't been to a country in a while or reported for a country for a while, you become a little bit outdated in what you know about the country. So we started this fellowship program, where we would bring reporters from Latin America, from India, from China, and to teach with another professor at Berkeley, and then students would take a trip to that country and do a series of articles. So I was very, keen on doing that as well.
And so you started in the early 90s and then you went all the way up to 2019. It kind of strikes me that obviously most colleges, universities, they have some kind of like they've historically had some kind of print newspaper or maybe a literary magazine or some kind of spin-off publication. But for the most part, if you wanted to practice journalism in college, you had to like kind of work for that generic newspaper. Whereas like obviously going beyond the 90s when you were entering the 2000s, there was the rise of the blogosphere, and my general sense is this like opened up a lot of opportunity for journalism departments because like faculty could basically launch their own publications on any
Yeah,
matter of niches, and then give their students some like real world experience on like specific niche, like actual niche based reporting and stuff like that. Is that generally true?
absolutely. And it was a huge opportunity for Berkeley. And the dean at that time, Neil Henry, sort of saw this and also saw that it was a way also in which to raise money to allow us to sort of enter the real world where students had to learn how to work in different media. It wasn't just print, it was video, audio, and we could have classes that were sort of media agnostic in the sense that you could teach a class where students would be working in all the different media, but the locals really, they were, mission locals started as part of that project. In the end, the Berkeley ended up with three pretty strong locals, and they were fabulous teaching vehicles for students because they were kind of giving back to the community. The community was getting this great news coverage, and the students were getting real world experience where readers held them accountable.
Yeah.
So there's nothing, yeah, it's
So to,
great.
to kind of summarize what you're saying is like as part of the teaching process, the Berkeley journalism department decided to launch actual local news sites, and as part of the curriculum for the students, it was graduate students, regular like
It was
undergrads.
it was grad it was graduate students.
So as part of their curriculum, they actually had to go out into the community and just learn all these skills and do this beat reporting, and then it was published to these websites.
Right, right. And before they would do that as well, but they would do it. We would try to get their articles published in the local media that were around, which was difficult. But the locals really gave them kind of a home publication and a home readership that held them accountable. It started in 2008. It was really great.
And to start out with, was it like completely funded by the university?
Yeah, I mean, it was, my salary was paid by the university. Another person who worked in other media's salary was paid by the university, and the students were free. I mean, it was really a great exchange and a great learning experience. And then in 2014, a new dean came in who was not that keen on the locals, and he wanted to cut them back to just when students were in session. And I felt like, to me, that wasn't a real local, just for the service of the students. It was really no longer for service of the community. So he asked me if I wanted to take Mission Local separate. It was also the only local that was not in the East Bay where Berkeley is. So I mean, it was nutty, but I did. I said sure. So I did it, and yeah, we've been independent ever since.
Well, when you launched, was it just like were you just publishing to some kind of inexpensive blogging platform like WordPress or something?
We were, yeah, using WordPress. We were set up on WordPress. Yeah.
And what was kind of like the core areas of coverage that the students were focusing on?
I mean, as any sort of at any newspaper, there are sort of, news trends, and, housing or gentrification would be important one year. Uh, Police would be important the next year. I mean, we always had a smattering and students had beats, but there always seemed to be sort of like a trend of news that we would sort of be with the news, follow the news. But we always kind of focused on issues that are really, important to all of San Francisco, but often negatively impact communities of color. And that has been sort of our calling card and doing a lot of street reporting. The site is still remains a training ground for young reporters, and our staff has from the get-go been diverse. And I sort of feel like, it's a site where we're training a group of reporters that reflects San Francisco's diversity,
And
and it's good.
what signals were you getting early on that like it was having some kind of community impact?
Um, well, I mean, support from readers, and to this day, most of our support comes from readers. 74% of our budget is reader funded. And so I think that is the biggest thing. We've always been driven by, content, like adding value to what's out there, not trying to repeat what the Chronicle and others are doing, but trying to add value, do it differently. I think it really came into sharp relief how important we were to the community and to the issues that we covered during COVID. I mean, we were on the ground. We were the only media, I think, that was still going into the office. And we had rules. You couldn't go inside anyone's house or any closed place to interview people, but you had to be out on the street reporting. And being out on the street, we picked up on a very big story, which was but I mean, everyone in the city knew that most of the people getting sick, because the city was reporting it, were the Latinx population. But when no one sort of was looking at is where is the city spending its testing resources? Like what population is that going to? And the city was not reporting that data. We were sort of picking up bits and pieces of data and putting it together on a rudimentary spreadsheet and discovered that the city was only spending 9% of its resources on the population that was getting 50% of the cases. So that was a big story in a series that actually ended up getting named a semifinalist in Goldsmith the following year. But it was a very important article, and I think people really saw then, that it's so important to have a strong local media and a media that's paying attention to stories that others aren't paying attention to. I mean, I was flummoxed. I kept thinking after we broke the first story that we're going to be totally overtaken by the other media that has a much more sophisticated data team. And we never were. I mean, it was kind of alarming to me. So there's a lot of stories out there that aren't being told that need to be told, and we try and fill that void.
You mentioned in 2014 you got a new dean that wasn't really keen on continuing this project. You decided to spin it off. What did you have
Mm-hmm.
to do to spin it off? Like, did you have to go out and find some kind of foundation support or something like that?
Yeah, I've always been terrible on the business side. I, I mean, we had very low expenses. I had a little bit of savings, and so I used that. And, with that, we sort of managed. We grew very slow. I mean, up until in 2020, when COVID hit, we were still only four people. And I'm free. I have a pension, so I didn't need to get paid. So it was a very lean ship for quite a while. And then slowly it became bigger and with the help of foundation, but also with the help of our reader support.
In that
Uh,
period between 2014 and 2020, what were kind of like the main funding mechanisms for it? Because I mean, obviously the pension allowed you to work for free, but if you got up to three or four people, then that's a decent amount of overhead.
yeah, I was. Uh, yeah, but it was very low overhead. We weren't paying people a lot, and we were giving them the opportunity to build a portfolio. We were paying people, um, but I don't think we started giving like health insurance until 2017, 2016. Yeah, because we couldn't afford to.
I know, but so
But
like where? So when you were able to afford to, like, where was that revenue coming in? Was that small
it was
donors,
coming
large
from
donors?
it was coming from a mix of small and larger donors. Yeah.
When did you launch your kind of donation program for, especially for the small donors?
We at the very beginning. I mean, but it was never, it was at the very beginning, but it was also just sort of in a way kind of passive income because I was so fixed on just producing good content. I always felt like if you produce good content, the readers will come. And we also at the beginning we had this arrangement with the Chronicle where they had a section where they ran like the first three or four graphs of all of the any kind of local media that was out there, and then we would get a link back. So that our traffic went way up with that, and that was good. And also the exposure was very good in terms of readership. And then in 2017, we hired Joe Eskenazi, who is, by far the best political reporter in San Francisco. And he's been like tremendously loyal and amazing. And he also just really helped broaden our readership and our donor support. Um, so, it builds, but it really builds, which is a big plus from reader content. I think what we're finding now is we could use like a huge amount of funding, just to a transformative amount of funding. That would be nice, but that would be nice for everyone out there.
In terms of driving donations, is there just like is do you rely completely just on a generic donation button, or you do funding drives, or do
No,
you do
no,
any?
we just did a funding drive. We had matching funds of 25,000, and in less than 3 weeks, I think we met our goal of 50,000. So now we do funding drives. That was the first time we did a spring drive. We had a very good new chair of Mission Local, the board's Frances Dinkelspiel, and she recommended doing that. So we did it, and then we did a series of newsletters along with that. We do a big funding drive, of course, at the end of the year, and and every year we've increased our take from that funding drive.
Yeah. So you said that up until 2020, you had only four people, and then the pandemic happens. Obviously, that drove a lot of traffic to your site.
Mhm.
How did that change things for you in terms of your funding sources and how you were able to expand and stuff like that?
Well, it was very good. I mean, you hate to say that the pandemic was good for you, but I think, UCSF, the doctors there, they all, I think realized the benefit of having like this very good local place that would do kind of major pieces. And I mean, they had been saying all along, the doctors there, that the city needs to change its testing strategy. And, they could point to our articles. And at that time, Chan Zuckerberg gave us a grant of 100,000. I mean, it was just like came over the transom. We would like to give you some money. And they did that for 2 years. And that was, transformative for us, because I saw doing the testing story how important it was to have a really strong data team, which I was not. And we took that money and hired an excellent data person. And now we have two other people working on data. So we have three people. We do phenomenal projects. And that that was really important. So our coverage in COVID drove that donation. That donation, we use that entirely to improve a segment that we were lacking in, and that has made us so much better. Um,
Did it also drive more small donor
yeah,
donations and memberships as well?
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
So how big is your team now?
Now we have 9 reporters. We have, including two senior editors. Joe Eskenazi is the managing editor. We hired another senior editor, Joe Ravano, because we simply have too many people to edit. And then we have two reporters who are paid for by the California Fellowship that's run out of Berkeley. And they're very strong on data and actually reporting as well. They're really great young reporters. And then we have a Report for America reporter as well. So there's only 3 reporters that we're actually, paying for fully.
So now that you have like a larger staff, like what are the core beats that you're covering? Like, yeah, I talked to a lot of local media entrepreneurs, and some, especially the nonprofit oriented. It's almost 100% civic based, like covering local, city council meetings, board of supervisors, schools, and stuff like that, versus another kind of local news site, often nonprofit, that is, it covers all that, but it also heavily covers business, new opening businesses, crime, different stuff like that. What have you found to be a good mix of beat coverage for your site?
Well, since we're always training, we're trying to give them the reporters will get dailies, of course, but we also our kind of reputation is digging deeper, following up. I think everything is in the follow up. That's where you find the good stories. So, for instance, there was a fire out in Potrero Hill, a housing project. This was in February 23, but the story is still with us, and we're still following up. So I send a reporter out there. I kind of figure this other media are going to go there, but not really. It's, out of the way. It's a project. A man died in this fire. No one went out there except Mission Local and a smart reporter who started asking questions about how did this fire happen? And it was quickly apparent to the reporter that there was this mix of tenants, paying tenants, and squatters living there and sort of getting into squabbles. And the management company that was paid for by the housing authority was doing nothing. They didn't even arrive on the day of the fire. So she did a follow up, she did another follow up. And in the meantime, we filed for a lot of public documents, and we discovered this document on the second tranche of documents that the city had known all along that this management company wasn't doing its job. So that triggered hearings. So hearings are held, things get a little better, but we don't drop the story. And this is what I train our reporters to do. That reporter actually left, sent another reporter out there to see what was happening. She discovers that, someone from the management company who had since been fired was charging the squatters rent. I mean, totally illegal. And, again, people were complaining about the maintenance of the place. So we wrote that story just last month, I think. Again, hearings have been held. We'll see. We'll keep going back. And I think that is our, calling card. So it's, the story maybe start with a daily and look like nothing, but we're going to return. And right now, we're doing a tremendous amount on elections. I mean, this is the first year that San Francisco is going to have a mayoral election in a presidential year, which means that there's going to be a lot more voters for all of the local elections. And, people are famously uninformed about local elections. So we started more than a month ago a series for each supervisor's race. There are 6 supervisors up for to be replaced, and a weekly series asking them questions and sending reporters out to the different districts once a week to meet with voters. We're going to be holding forums in all those districts. We're doing a mayoral series in which a reporter follows the mayoral candidates. We do a rotation, a weekly rotation. This week, Joe Ravano, the senior editor, is following Breed so that we see how they run. So it's getting close to the candidates and sourcing up. I mean, all of this is so that the reporters can learn more about the city, the different districts, also source up. And we're sharing we're translating it into Spanish and Chinese. And this is another thing. We have 3 people who speak Cantonese. There are 5 people on the staff who speak Spanish. So we have like cultural entree and linguistic entree into a lot of communities that other media don't have. We're translating all of this into Spanish and Chinese, and we're sharing it with whoever wants it, any media that wants it. So yeah, it's we're trying to see if we can increase engagement in places where there's lower engagement, if we can just make for a more informed voter. And we're doing a lot on campaign finance. I mean, the data team has done unbelievable work on campaign finance. And all of this is available to everyone and translated into 2 different languages. So that's our focus this year. At the same time, we're still trying to do, work on housing and police reform and the other beats that we've consistently covered.
So historically, local newspapers have been like a good entry point for journalists into their careers.
Yeah,
That's how I got my start in
yeah,
journalism. Is that are you finding yourself you're hiring a lot of entry level reporters and having to
yeah.
train them on kind of like the basics of journalism and beat reporting and local news and stuff like that?
Yes, absolutely. And, we're hiring a lot of journalists of color because, I mean, everyone in the big media competes for the same group of journalists, and we can't compete in that arena. And I would like to be part of that group that increases the pipeline of journalists. So, after 3 or 4 years, we'll lose a journalist. They'll go elsewhere, and that's fine. But in the meantime, maybe the first year or the first 6 months is a lot of, training and working with them and developing them. But they get really good very fast. And we're very much in demand as a place to be in terms of the young aspiring journalists because we give them a lot of agency. So we get a lot out of the people who are working for us, and they get a lot from us. Um, yeah,
Do you
I
produce
have
any
someone.
not? Oh, sorry. Keep on going.
I was just going to say, someone's visiting now. He's staying with me at the house. A former reporter who was actually working through the pandemic with me, and Julian Mark, and he's now at the Washington Post. I mean, that's what we like to see. It's great.
So, do you produce any non-written content like podcasts or video or anything like that?
Oh, we've had in the past very strong video. Early on, much more. I think because half of the class at Berkeley was strong in video. And we're weaker in that now. We're going to have a couple of interns this summer who are strong in video, and we hope to do more. We would like to do more. I think podcast is probably not for us immediately because we just don't have the staff to do it. If we had the money, maybe. Um, yeah, I mean, no one has really figured out in San Francisco the really strong local podcast. And the Chronicle, which I thought had kind of done it with Fifth and Mission, dropped it. I guess it didn't have enough, of an audience, which was really a pity because it got known. It was the one podcast locally that people knew about.
Yeah, I've written about in my newsletter why local there aren't many good examples of local news podcasts,
Yeah,
and a lot of it has to do with just like local businesses are just not sophisticated ad buyers, and they don't understand the value of even though they might be doing
hmm,
radio advertising, they don't understand the value of like podcasts. Like it just doesn't sound like real
right.
to them or something like that. So
Yeah,
it's hard to make a local podcast like actually profitable. I've had Lance Noble on from City Side. Obviously, the
it's
strategy
terrific. Yeah.
there, yeah, they started out with Berkeley side, and now they've kind of expanded beyond that. Obviously, there are other districts in San Francisco and the Bay Area as a whole. Do you have any ambitions to kind of expand beyond Mission Local?
Well, our coverage is now citywide. It's been citywide for a while. Our donor base is citywide. And it really, I think what distinguishes our coverage is doing stories that others don't do. So, finding those really great pieces that are out there that no one else is looking at. And the fact that our reporters are out on the street reporting, it just, you pick things up when you're out. You're not just going to meetings, you're going just talking to people. And there's a lot of interaction between our reporters and residents across San Francisco. So that's a big plus for us. We're also focusing a lot this year on, building out our business side. This is something we've never focused on. Sort of, we've been very passive about it in a way because of time, and I just didn't have the bandwidth. But Google just gave us some money to hire a business development person. So we've hired that person. She's amazing. And we like just to build up that side so that our revenue sources are maybe, 30, 30, 30, divide it a little bit more evenly. Um,
30, 30, 30 being
and
sponsorships,
I
donor,
mean,
or
no, yeah, I guess I would like our donors still to lead and be the at least more than 50% because I think that's a very good thing to have. But that we would also we have a lot of low hanging fruit in advertising, which we haven't gotten after. It just comes over the transom as passive, but that's grown passively also. And sponsorships, yeah, just a more sophisticated approach to other revenue streams, which I think Lance at Cityside has done a really great job of.
what about like so there's small donors, but I also interview a lot of local news nonprofits where they have like a large emphasis on one courting large donors, but then also grant writing and foundation support. How much of that business person? How much are they going to be focused on that part?
They are focused on larger donors, and they're looking at, trying to increase that, of course. And we ourselves, the sort of senior team, do a lot of the grant writing, and we're constantly doing that. Those are longer plays; they take longer amount of time. We will apply for the first press forward open call, and yeah, we're constantly, trying to meet people looking for new sources. We'd love to get an American journalism. Uh, what is it? American Journalism Project to get a huge grant from them, and we've been working on that. It all takes time. There are a lot of people like us. There are a lot of people out there that are doing very good work, and so the competition is pretty stiff.
speaking of which, so obviously the local print legacy newspaper industry has been hit by hard times. Number of factors there, not having to do with the economics of local news, but private equity funds and different stuff like that also
Hmm.
playing a part. Mission Local is often cited as kind of like one of the bright use cases people point to as like, okay, this might be a viable future for local news. But obviously you're in a very affluent, high profile city. How like replicable do you think your model could be across the rest of the United States?
Yeah, I think it can be replicated. I actually don't, I think we could be very much a model. And I think the thing that's different, very different from us about than other nonprofits is our training program. And I think that has been tremendous, and it's tremendous in terms of the talent that we're able to attract because of it. And also, we're not probably our salaries, can start out a little bit lower. They're pretty nice salaries, though. We're starting people pretty well, but they're only here for three to 4 years, so they're not going to be earning 100,000 by the time they leave. And that is helpful to any new site, definitely. I think it is. I'm really interested in expanding our collaboration with other media and working on that as well. And I think that might prove a model, especially for a site starting off in a large city.
In
Uh,
what way? What way do you want to
you know,
partner with?
in well, partnering through allowing our content to be used and just seeing other ways in which we might partner. I'm not exactly sure yet, but I feel like there is something there. Um, we'll see.
Okay, Lydia, those were all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
We're at missionlocal.org.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining
Okay.
me.
Thank you. Take care.